Welcome to the April 9th, 2024 City Council work session. I'd like to now turn it over to City Manager Benda to walk us through the agenda review.
Thank you, Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of City Council. Good afternoon. We have a couple business item briefings. And Mayor, again, I'd ask, with your permission, what we normally do is have the work session to follow by the business item briefings, but suspect that there'll be robust conversations about budget reconciliation. So move those up. And one other aspect or component that I'll request is that we have Lynchburg City Schools go first. They're here and have a meeting at 5 o'clock, so we want to make sure that they make it up the hill and to their appointed meeting. So understanding if you're amenable to all of that, a couple quick items just for your and your peers and your colleagues' information. We are cutting a ribbon on the turf field tomorrow. It will be a little bit misty, rainy, but that's okay. That's exciting, and we'll have some of our high school sports and athletes out there to help us do so. The amphitheater that we were going to break ground on this Thursday, it's supposed to be a bit of a deluge. We have postponed that until next Thursday at 5 o'clock, so hope to see you all there. And I'd be remiss if I didn't recognize that today is opening day for our Lynchburg Hillcats, so that's a really cool opportunity. So good things happening, and thank you, Mayor. With that, I turn it back to you.
Okay, thank you so much. So we will go ahead and do our first business item briefings with the schools then. Request to amend the Lynchburg City Schools major classification funding for fiscal year 2024. This item will appear before council for action on April 13th, 2024. Ms. Donna Witt? No? Yes?
This would be Dr. Reed Woker. Oh, you're going to do that? Okay. Yes, we'll have Donna lead in and then followed by if there are any questions.
Okay, great.
I'm sorry, I thought there was an item before me. So, thank you. On March 12th, the City School Board voted to request that City Council transfer the remaining $1,671,820 in the FY 2024 Lynchburg City Schools contingency reserve to the instruction category. The superintendent sent a memo to Mr. Benda, City Manager Benda, on March 19th. The decision to seek the transfer was based on four things: the governor's recent budget amendment for 24 to the sales tax revenue resulted in a reduction of $1.2 million. The updated VDOE calc tool also indicates a reduction in the grocery tax hold a harmless fund of $81,000. And the rise of utility costs, City Schools estimates expenditures associated with electric, water, and gas to be approximately $2 million over the current FY 2024 operating budget allocation. And then, given the cost of monthly health insurance claims, City Schools estimate that the 24 claims will exceed employee contributions by $1.5 million in the current year, despite an increase of employee contributions beginning in January of 2024. And Dr. Wotica and the Chief Financial Officer, Sonia Jamies, is here to answer any questions you might have.
Okay, thank you so much. Does anybody have any questions? Councilman Helgeson?
Donna, I guess this would be probably for you, maybe. I know you listed several things that have happened. Last year when we did the allocation for the budget and the allocation for schools funding, the extra funds, because we had already given more to the classroom, the extra funds that were placed in the contingency reserve were specifically because of the state budget and the uncertainty. I think schools said, oh man, the state budget may cut the budget by a certain amount, of which I don't believe that happened. Now I'm hearing some things with regarding something different in the, are those for 2024?
The sales tax revenue resulted in a reduction of $1.2 million.
So the sales tax revenue, what was that? Describe that. Was that less revenue coming to the city and the contribution,
no,
or less?
Less, because the schools get their own allotment for sales tax the same way the city does. And they received $1.2 million less than what they projected.
Okay. And then what were the other ones? So you said less sales.
The
Tax
grocery
revenue.
tax hold harmless funds were less by $81,565. And utilities were under budgeted by approximately $2 million. And then their health insurance claims are exceeding expectations by $1.5 million.
You know, the under budgeting, that's a level of, budgeting wherewithal, I would say. I mean, normally we do budgeting, you do budgeting for the whole city, and normally the estimated revenue comes in like 0.1% or 0.5%. It's hard to fathom that utilities would be under budgeted. I mean, I can't imagine utilities are much over 2 million to begin with, let alone 100% off. So it's, what's the normal budget for utilities with schools?
About $5 million.
So about 40% off. Huh. Okay. So there are some things with regarding this year's budget. I was more concerned and thought that the possibility of using the money that isn't spent this year can be carried over and be applied for next year's budget, where I know the schools have said, oh my goodness, lots of problems are happening, and lots of less revenue in spite of, or more spending in spite of less students. So I was hopeful that we could possibly use some of this extra that wasn't spent, this reserve for 2024, to be utilized in some capacity to help them with the transition period in 2025. So maybe.
Dr. Robinson, at least as they've proposed it, it looks like the request meets the expenses, and these are one-time funds, so it would have to be used for one-time opportunities, not ongoing expenses in the impending year. But this is what they presented. This is before you, and you're not voting on it this evening. It comes back to you at your next council meeting.
But some of the one-time expenses, I think you just, some of these they're ongoing expenses, though. I mean, utilities, I don't think utilities is just going to go away. I think the loss of the 1% in the sales tax revenue isn't going away. I think the groceries receipts tax, the decline, isn't going away. So these aren't one-time, I don't believe. So
Those themselves may not be, but what they're asking is using existing resources in this fiscal year to meet the expenses that they're showing by this year's end. Do I have that correct?
even though they're operating expenses that are going to continue.
Which would mean that they
Correct.
would happen next year. It's just for this year, there's a shortfall.
Okay, thank you.
Councilman Missions?
I just want to clarify, because you mentioned that they were one-time funds and that this is a one-time, but this is actually the operating budget for city schools. This is,
And
these
if I wasn't
contingency reserves
clear-
are, I just want to make sure we're clear on that.
Unclear. So they're taking that money that they have in contingency,
Okay,
and because of the expenses that they've shown in those different areas and where there are shortfalls, yes, they may be operating, but they want to use these monies to make sure that they're at least structurally balanced by year end. Do I have that right, Donna?
correct.
Okay.
so and these are, this 1.67 million is actually part of the operating budget for Lynchburg City Schools. This is not part of any one-time, or this is actually the operating budget.
$1.6 million was one of the categories that council adopted in the '24 budget
Yep.
to be used if needed.
Got it. So these are expected to be ongoing funds, but as Councilman Helgeson noted, it looks like we've got some, potentially expected shortfalls coming ongoing. Do we have any kind of breakdown on the utility cost? What the increase was, like where we're seeing that 40% increase in the utility cost?
Good evening. Yes, sir. So we actually showed that at the joint meeting, I guess a couple weeks ago now.
Okay.
Primarily, it's from electric. Those costs have increased a fair amount.
So it's the cost of the electric. What about consumption? Is the consumption the same?
Consumption relatively flat. There's been a very small increase, but it's, call it 20 or 25% increase in cost, but maybe a 3 or 4% consumption increase.
Do we have any projection on how that's going to change when we get these electric school buses that are going to have to be recharged? Do we have any idea what the offset's going to be on that? Because if electric rates continue to rise, how much is that going to cost us versus the savings on the fuel? Have we,
Yeah, great question, fair question. So when we negotiated with the power company for the easement for that to occur, the power company provided a special, they call tariff or a special rate for the electric school bus charging stations, and so that's in perpetuity.
Yeah.
So what we, at the time, we budgeted about a $300,000 savings removing from the diesel engines to the electric based on those rates. Now, of course, that'll change over time, but that's what we projected.
got it, thank you.
Vice Mayor Faraldi?
What happens when these funds are used? When they're gone, what happens to them?
They will be used in this current fiscal year. So
Are they-
they're asking for them to be moved out of the contingency line to the instructional line. So they'll be utilized in the current fiscal year.
So when they're gone, though, they're not replaced.
That's correct, because 25's budget will stand on its own.
So in other words, by using these one-time funds for contingency, the schools are then left with no contingency in the future.
For this current budget, that's correct.
What about next budget?
Yes, please, thank you.
If I could clarify one thing, the good city manager said, so I think what you might have meant was that if we don't spend that $1.6 million, Mr. Helgeson, I think you would say that would go to fund balance and then could be used for one-time expenditures. It would not necessarily be one-time money right now. It's ongoing revenue right now. It's based on the full $39 million that we provided. So these are funds that are available and operating right now, but they need to be applied to instruction for this case.
So,
Is that fair?
just speaking to the utility numbers, I'm adding them up as we speak, and I'm a little puzzled. In 2021, the total cost for utilities was $2.2 million. 2022 was 2.8, and I'm just now putting in, roughly speaking, 2023, and that was 3.5. So when you say there were about $5 million in utility costs, is that for this upcoming budget, or is that actual over the trajectory of the last few years?
Yeah, so we're projecting that based on the projection over the last couple of years. I'm not sure which data you're pointing to.
I'm looking at the presentation from our joint
Sure
school
thing.
board meeting.
So in 21, about 1.7 million from electric, half a million from, about 400,000 from gas, and about 250,000 from sewer, and that's water and sewer, and so that's increased over time.
What are you looking at?
A chart that I made to address this one I met with Donna.
So those numbers are different than what were presented to us last week.
I don't have those numbers in front of me, so these are actual numbers.
The ones you
Yeah.
presented here just now are different than the ones last week.
So which fiscal year are you talking about?
The electric was 1.1660494, gas was 352,112, and water was 225,684.
Okay. Yeah.
Probably can do this faster than I can.
Yeah. Let me clarify that. I can get an answer back to you for the next. Yeah,
That
for
would
sure.
be
Yep.
helpful.
Yep, for sure.
When I share this, I think I'm sharing concerns that have been offered thus far. I'm concerned about by the way it's presented to me, it seems as if we're using one-time funds in a way that we haven't before. We're getting shaken heads, so please explain it to me so this little guy can understand.
So the contingency funds were part of the overall $39 million that were given to city schools locally for fiscal year '24. It was just a separate category, but it was part of the $39 million, which is from ongoing revenues.
Okay.
So it's not a specific, once it falls to fund balance, it becomes one time.
Yeah.
But this was a category that council adopted from ongoing funds that totaled into the $39 million.
So I would also ask Dr. Woodica, how would this impact you for next year, if at all?
Well, so remember, one of the things we talked about last time was that we are trying to right-size those budget lines to the best extent we can. I'll clarify those numbers, get to make sure they're right. We met with Ms. Witt a couple weeks ago to treat those, to make sure that she was on board. We adjusted them just a little bit for next budget year, about $250,000. So one of our major, right? So one of our major things we're trying to do in this budget is trying to make sure that our budget lines are reflecting actual costs of doing business. And so that's part of our budget concern for next year, is making sure that we are being clear and reflective and we're budgeting enough in order to cover the cost of.
Does this relate at all by chance to some of the school closure plans?
No, this is not.
Okay.
Not related.
The reason I'm asking is I'm comparing these utility costs. I'm asking that question because, as you're saying, you're planning for the future and articulating that. I don't know if it's on the agenda or not, but I saw something that the school system is planning to do a public-private partnership for improvements at Bass Elementary, and there is no plan submitted or funding stream for those improvements at Bass in the city CIP. So I'm curious why the school division is putting forward a request to be bid out for build when there is. Seems like you're putting the cart before the horse on
Sure.
that.
So we received an unsolicited PPEA proposal, which, as you know, we're taking it through the process. And that is the process by which we would go through that. So that will be an agreement between the school board and the city council if that project goes forward. If the school board chooses to accept the proposal, there's lots to be going there, but that again is an unsolicited proposal that came from a local contractor.
What is that going to look like at Bass?
So I can't share the details of the proprietary information that's in the second volume of the PPEA. Just you know how that works. But what the proposal is.
I also know that usually there's a plan for a development of sorts with the city, and then such a submission is made, not the other way around. So
no, sir. There are many ways that PPEAs occur. PPEAs occur oftentimes unsolicited, and then there has to be an agreement between.
I understand they're unsolicited, but if there's no plan in place in the CIP, the capital improvement plan, why is the school board and school administration moving forward with putting out there that there's going to be some development at Bass when we haven't approved
Sure.
any of that?
Well, so I think, as you're aware, the school board adopted a plan for a master
City
facilities
council
plan.
hasn't. Please answer the question.
I'm answering the question, if you'll just let me finish. But the school board adopted a master facilities plan. We are bringing that forward as it was solicited. This is something that the school board will consider. I don't know whether they'll choose to accept it or not, but it is important for the school board to be able to consider that, because we certainly would not want that to come and just be killed by staff.
I don't believe you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Anybody else hasn't spoken yet? Councilman Huskisson?
I guess, Donna, maybe this would be to you. I guess maybe it is you to read, since that your request is saying we want to transfer this $1.6 million that's currently in reserves. We want to transfer that to instruction so we can pay the electric bill. Now, to me, when I think of instruction, call me maybe old school, but I think of instruction is typically the kids or the teachers that are instructing the students, the ones that are actually giving instruction actually in the classroom, as opposed to the heating bills, the gas bills, the water, the sewer, those utility bills that you enumerated to the tune of $2 million.
So I can clarify. So I believe what the superintendent's letter was intended to convey was just simply the fact that we've had a number of financial challenges. The intent for putting this into instruction is related to ensure that we can pay the health insurance claims. We thought that was the cleanest way to do that, to put that into the benefits related to primarily teachers and instructional assistants, because that's where our biggest costs are. We thought that was the simplest way to do that. And again, certainly utilities are part of the financial challenges. That's why we also enumerated in this letter that the number of electric consumption reductions that we're working on, but we're also working to make sure in this, we will just apply this to the benefits side. Again, the simplest way to do that, and also preserves that health insurance reserve, which we do believe that we'll need to help with next fiscal year.
I mean, 'cause to me, it seems like we're taking a reserve and saying, oh, it's going to instruction. And to me, it's hard to even fathom that it is going. You know, we've talked about the declining enrollment, obviously, ad nauseum for the last 20-some years. And part of those water, sewer, heating, and gas, and all those bills are a function of, you know, you have to heat schools, whether they're full or whether they're empty or 50% empty. I think that still gets back, especially with the budget coming up, to right-sizing the schools, which is the chart that I showed where we've lost thousands of kids over the last 20 years. With that being the case, I think it's incumbent to do something. You know, when you're actually having less buildings that you have to heat for natural gas or have lights or water and sewer, those buildings that are actually not being fully used, that helps to defray and lower some of those overall overhead costs because they're now in, less buildings. So I'm really, and I just heard what was said a minute ago. Predominantly, you said that maybe this health insurance reserve will predominantly be for instruction or teachers, or some of it will be for teachers. When we're moving it, I think that's where those categories came into play, where the category says this is really for instruction. I mean, those are pretty clear, aren't they? I guess they're fairly wide sweeping in the fact that they're instruction, but transportation is definitely different than instruction, right?
And it's a different category.
Yeah, in a different category. So when I'm saying instruction, this isn't saying, hey, we're going to hire more teachers or more people are leaving.
Yeah, great question. So remember, so I'd ask you, what do you think the most expensive part of instruction is?
The teachers.
Teachers.
Yeah,
so we
absolutely.
pay teachers a salary, right? But of course, we also pay benefits. And when we have a situation where in our self-funded environment,
Yep.
where we have fewer premiums coming in than expenses going out, that's related to the cost of instruction.
Yep.
So the categories related primarily is cost of employing instructional folks, teachers and instructional assistants, principals.
So I just remember in this budget, when we kind of walked through this, the allocation for schools, the 39 million, when we allocated those different categories, I completely remember that a whole lot more went to instruction this year, this budget year 2024 that we're in now, versus the previous years, because it was specifically stated that this council wanted more to go to the classroom, more into instruction. And now you're saying, for some reason, that even more in instruction wasn't there. So anyway, we'll get, I guess we'll maybe get some of these answers that are coming and questions that are happening. I know this isn't the actual hearing, this is the business item briefing. But I think it does, as you can tell, there's lots of questions, so.
Anybody that hasn't spoken yet? Council questions?
One question, which probably is for you. Is there any reason that even like in a closed session, we couldn't be read into whatever this PPEA thing is?
I'm not understanding your question.
So the PPEA proposal for Bass that Dr. Woodica mentioned, is there any reason that city council couldn't also be read into that, basically, given the same information, the proprietary information that we can't discuss in open session that the school board has been provided?
So I think because the proposal has not been accepted yet formally by the school division, it's still under somewhat of a proprietary trade secret point. At the point that they begin advertising for proposals, it's my understanding then the other individuals can submit proposals, and the proposal itself, at least the portion that isn't related to money or to trade secrets, is publicly available for inspection.
Vice Mayor Foley?
Just for the record, according to the presentation from last week from the joint session, the average utilities from fiscal year 21 into the proposed, through 24 right now, the average was $2.58 million for utilities for Lynchburg City Schools.
So just for clarification for those listening, so I make sure that this is understood, and for myself as well. You have approximately $1.6 million of a shortfall for your 2024 fiscal year. Or you're asking for what's in the reserve fund at this point to be brought over to help you meet a shortfall in expenses for the 2024 fiscal year.
That's right.
What you're asking is that out of all the categories that you've shared with us this evening or this afternoon, you're choosing to put it, or we're going to be asking us to put it in the instruction category because teachers fall into that category along with all kinds of other things, but particularly teachers that include their benefits, and that you've seen an increase in their health claims, which was a big part of, your increase in expenses this past year. And that's where you plan on applying this reserve fund allocation and paying towards that shortfall of this 2024 year, correct? Okay, so that's part of that category. There's no other category for health benefits. It falls into instruction because that's teachers and employees. That's why it has to go in that category, correct?
Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so that's why you're asking to pay it. Otherwise, you would have a shortfall in paying that off in the 2024 year.
And if I could, I would just want to also mention, just so you think we're not only asking for, again, these are LCS funds, but to apply them different places. We've also established a hiring freeze for the remainder of the fiscal year. We have stopped all PO, purchase orders that are not directly affecting student experiences to the best extent we possibly can. There are certain things that we just have to do to do business, but for the most part, if it's not affecting a student directly, we are not spending money on that. We've also try to greatly adjust our utility consumption for the year. So we are trying to reduce those costs for the remainder of the fiscal year. We just need a little bit of help to make it through the rest of the year with these funds.
Okay. All right, thank you very much, appreciate it. Okay, moving on to the rezoning R1 low-density residential districts to R-4 high-density residential district, 717 and 725 Leesville Road. This item will appear before council for action on April 23rd, 2024. Ms. Rachel Frischheisen.
Thank you, Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of council. The subject property is comprised of two parcels located at 717 and 725 Leesville Road, totaling approximately 4,200 of an acre. If the petition is approved, an entrance to a 26-unit residential development would be constructed. These units would be duplex style with 2 units in each building. The residential units and the parking for the units would be located in Campbell County and accessed via property in the city of Lynchburg. The city zoning ordinance would consider these units to be apartments since the buildings are on one common parcel rather than on individual lots that we would normally see with duplexes. Because the property would serve as access for apartments in the county, R4 is rezoning. R4 zoning is required for these parcels in the city to do so. The portion of the project located in Campbell County was rezoned in 2023 from general commercial business to multifamily residential, and the county's future land use map was amended from urban development area commercial to medium to high density mixed. These duplex style units would create a transition between the lower density homes along Leesville Road and the more intense commercial development that would have occurred in Campbell County if the rezoning had not been pursued, as well as the remaining commercial that surrounds the parcel in Campbell County. The Planning Commission recommended approval of the rezoning petition after a public hearing on March 13th, and this item will return for a City Council public hearing on April 23rd. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Any questions or comments? Councilman Helgeson?
So this came in from a R1, which is the lowest residential density, and then pushed for an R4, which is the most intensive density. In an area that has, I think we need to preserve the R1. I mean, it's R1. I don't see a valid reason to say what's the compelling reason to change the zoning. So anyway, I guess we'll see that. So how many units could be on this? I think you said like half an acre, something like that?
So in the R4 district, I think you're referring to the units per acre. R4 allows for 21.78 units per acre. However, in this case, because the R4 would be located directly adjacent to R1, because the parcels on either side are remaining R1, there's a 50-foot building setback, which means no units could actually be built on the portion within the city, because they would not be able to meet that setback. So I think Councilmember Helgeson was referring to the dwelling units per acre that R4 allows. And R4 allows us to go up to 21.78 units per acre, which if you multiplied that times the 0.48 acres you have here, you would get a number of units. However, because the R4 would be located adjacent to R1, our zoning ordinance has a provision where the high-density residential, when it's against low-density residential, has a 50-foot building setback, so they could not actually meet that 50-foot setback from the adjoining residential. So really, all that could be there is the driveway. No units would be within the city.
Councilman Dolan?
I just want to try to understand this. So the actual units will be in Campbell County, right? And so the
Correct.
R4 is for really the access road to get to the units? Is that what we're talking about here?
That's correct, and that's consistent with what we've said in previous petitions, is that the zoning for the access should match the zoning for the use,
Correct, okay, thank you.
if we were to allow it.
Got it.
So, just to be clear on this, has Campbell County approved this plan? So this plan's approved by Campbell?
They approved a rezoning. I do not believe they've submitted a site plan. I think they're waiting to see that they get the access that they are planning on from, or they're asking for from the city.
And if we don't rezone, right? Is there any reason they can't still use that property for access?
The only way I believe they would be able to do that if they were to dedicate that parcel as right-of-way and build a city street into it. That would be the only way I would see them
So-
being able to do that if
so
city
there-
council
there-
were to deny it.
So there are other options than rezoning, because the concerns that I have with that obviously is, you know, you start there and then the next property owner is gonna come and say, I wanna make this R4. And then the next property owner is gonna come and say, I wanna make this R4. And that is a single family area, right? And I know we can't control what happens on the other side of the city-county line.
Sure.
But we can't control our zoning here in Lynchburg. And I don't think that just because Campbell County is going to approve X, that doesn't mean that we necessarily need to do it that way. If there's another way that they can still use the land to access their property.
Okay.
Help me understand why rezoning is better than saying to the developer, put in a city street.
Well, I mean, we have not discussed the street option with the developer. I mean, that was just a what if that I was trying to respond to. The reason that planning staff had recommended, I mean, I was a little on the fence about this as well. The reason planning staff ultimately recommended approval to Planning Commission was the fact that in Campbell County, the property was, and the remainder property around it was zoned for essentially their higher intensity commercial. And looking at it, you know, to go from the low density residential homes on Leesville Road to the more intense commercial use directly across the county boundary, this felt like a better transition between those two uses than to have the low density right up against that commercial use. So I don't know if that answered the question, but
It doesn't, but it addresses other
Okay.
questions. It does, but not the way you intended, I think.
Okay.
So if rezoning happens, who maintains that access road?
It would be private, so it would be on the developer. Oh, sorry, if they were to dedicate a street?
If it's rezoned
Oh,
as
if it's
planned.
rezoned, okay.
The
No, that
developer
would be the
maintains.
developer's responsibility.
Yeah, it's
Yes.
the developer's responsibility.
Yes.
If we were to stick our heels in the ground because we don't want it to be rezoned, then the only option that we're aware of would be that they would have to grant right-of-way on property they own for us to come in, and then we're responsible for maintaining that. And I would imagine because they're doing that, we're then gonna have to force them to put in sidewalk, correct?
I mean, there are instances where private streets are allowed. That would probably be a discussion with the petitioner and our engineering division as to whether it would be a publicly maintained or a privately maintained street.
To your point, Mr. Vice Mayor, in anyone's development, if it's a city street, I think we would, depending on the development, and keep me true on this, Kent, is look for a curb gutter and, develop kind of street.
And who would be on the hook for that? Us or the
So
developer?
we would have to negotiate that, candidly. I mean, that's, if you deny the rezoning and move this way, I think it's to the developer.
It would be on the developer to
Right.
put the street in.
So that's an additional cost, whereas by simply rezoning it, they have access, they can use the property that they've purchased. And trust me, I hear the concerns of, rezoning. I don't want to besmirch that in the slightest. But in trying to balance all of this, we're not deciding whether or not these apartments or townhomes, technically townhomes, condos, what are they?
They are apartments, they're duplex-style apartments.
Duplex style apartments, so they're more townhomes than anything else in a way because of how they're going to be used. Not unlike the ones on Old Graves Mill, I would imagine.
I'm not sure which one you're referring to.
It looks like a single family home, but it has two entrances to separate units. We're tracking. He's nodding his head. Long story short, what I'm trying to say is these are going in. Do we want to stick our heels in the ground over an access road and the type of access road, and then who has to foot the bill for maintaining it? Who has to foot the bill for putting in the sewer and gutter? Those are questions to consider.
So, Councilman, Vice Mayor Feraldi, you're absolutely correct in your line of thinking. If the city, if council chose to deny the rezoning and kind of press the issue on them dedicating out a public street, which they could do without council approval, then the city would be on the hook for a 50-50 split of the curb, gutter, and sidewalk. And then we, the city, would be responsible for the maintenance of that street, maintaining the pavement, maintaining this, pushing snow on it, so on and so forth, all for development.
Only to the county line, though.
Correct, just that street, but we'd be doing it essentially for development in Campbell County. So there are costs involved in that. Obviously, it's council's decision, but it probably makes more sense for it to be a private drive than a public street.
From a fiscal sense, yes.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. What's that development on the top left-hand corner of that screen?
Those would be, I believe, townhomes at the top left. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Thank you.
Anyone else that hasn't spoken? Oh, Councilman Taylor?
So if we rezone it, Lynchburg is off the hook.
That's one way to put it for street maintenance.
That's right.
If they were to go that way.
Yes.
Anyone else? Council missions?
Where's the closest R4 to that?
Let's see, I believe those townhomes across the street are
R3.
R3 with a conditional use permit for townhomes. I don't see any on the adjoining zoning map. I could get you a distance for the public hearing.
Yeah, I mean, I think that'd be beneficial to know. And I'm just curious about what those other options would look like for them to access that where there is no hook for us. Is there any other option if we did not rezone where they would be responsible for the entrance?
I can relay that to the developer.
Yeah, because that's kind of where my thought process is on that.
Okay.
What's there right now?
It is I believe it's a mobile home. A mobile home.
Do we know like the status and what it's sitting at? I mean, like how good or bad of condition it is?
I don't want to
Fair.
make any assumptions.
Fair.
about-
I'll say what I'll be doing. I'm going to be going to the GIS and looking at how long someone has owned it to see if it's been sitting for a while. Because I'm sure you probably don't have that off the top of your head when the last time it was purchased or sold or anything. So that's one other thing I'll be looking for.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Sorry, Councilman Hugson.
So Bud Drive, so you have that kind of black, is that not going to be able to, rather than having to rezone in the middle of Leesville Road, why can't you access through Bud Drive?
So we talked a little bit about Bud Drive at the Planning Commission meeting. It is, looks like it is shown as right-of-way on city GIS. However, it looks more like a driveway, just in terms of infrastructure. It's not much. At this point, with this concept plan, they were proposing to put a gate at that end, and it was going to be a fire emergency access. You know, if the main entrance were to be blocked somehow, that would be gated, and there would be a Knox box for the fire department to use, but it would not be for everyday traffic for the residents going in and out of the development.
So rather than changing the middle of Leesville Road, where there's houses or mobile homes or whatever's in there, it's all R1, why wouldn't they just improve Bud Drive? Obviously, it's not a, if you're improving a road, improve Bud Drive, it's already a road, right? Even though it's gravel and whatnot. Why wouldn't you just improve that, and then that's your entrance? And then you don't have to change the neighborhood, the single-family neighborhood zoning from an R1 to an R4.
So at the time of Planning Commission, their research on whether Bud Drive was public or private, and who would own it if it is private, was sort of inconclusive. But I can ask if they have come across any
To me,
other.
that seems like a pretty easy one, because it's already there. If it is public or private, if they're looking at buying other property, you buy that one, and you have the road that comes in, and then you don't have to rezone. You just improve Bud Drive as it already is. You tool around the back, and that's how you get into all those places. So now when I'm looking at this map in the front, if you back up a few pages, so 725 and 717, right across from Beulah Baptist, those are the ones that are being requested to be going from an R1 to an R4?
That's correct.
So when I look up and down here, you see 727, 729, 731, 721, 719. So all of those are still R1. So I remember years ago when went to the Planning Commission convention or training or whatever the thing was. But when you're looking at something that is completely the opposite, to me, that almost looks like the spot zoning, which it's R1, R1, R1. Boom, R4, R1, 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 R1. One little sliver, one house accessing it going to R4. And so anyway, you don't have to address that now and answer that now. I know this isn't this is the business side of briefing. To me, that's the easiest way to do it is to figure out Bud Drive, figure the road. If there's a road already there, you have it blackened in, enter the back, and they're good. Then they can enter their Campbell County. You know, years ago, I guess I was probably the only one in this room that was here. Tom was there, but when Coles wanted to develop in Campbell County, Campbell County needed access off of Ward's Ferry Road to get into the brand new Coles shopping center. with that, we had lots of discussion about ins and outs and way the things could go. But what it was is basically saying, city, we want all the traffic to come on your roads to get to our development, where the development, I'm happy for Campbell County, has development that they want to do and get the tax revenue and all those things for it in Campbell County. But they want to kind of rock our neighborhood apple cart, if you will, in order to get to their development. So if there's, and Tom was here, I guess about the only, and so maybe that's something that you can kind of talk about. We don't have to talk about it today again, but I think those are some things that are kind of important because, you know, spot zoning isn't a good thing, is it, Mr. City Attorney? No. So I don't think that's a good thing for us to be voting on, especially. It may not be that exactly. To me, it smells and looks like it. So anyway, I think we've got lots of things to look at between now and our meeting.
Vice Mayor Feraldi?
By my digging and comparing both GIS systems, I don't know if the Bud Drive theory would work. I'll be curious to see what that looks like myself.
It is pretty narrow.
It's not that it's narrow. I was looking about who owns what properties back there and who may or may not be living there currently. But that's just an observation. So.
Well, I will relay council's concerns to the developer.
Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
We will move on to our work session agenda items, fiscal year 2025 proposed budget reconciliation. Mr. Winterbend? Yes.
Yes, oh, good, thank you. As Ms. Witt, our Chief Financial Officer, is coming forward, between our last meeting, which was a joint work session with Lynchburg City Schools, and now many of you have had questions, and they've centered, most have centered on school funding and how it works. And so what I've asked Donna to do, which I'll say this, Donna, Greg, and I went to New York last week, and we had really good interviews with the rating agencies. I will say, I wish that I had been in maybe Las Vegas with Donna. As far as ability, she asked the person that we were with on, I think it was the Wednesday. Was it Wednesday or Thursday? When was the last time that New York City had experienced an earthquake? And thinking about the prophecy there, I don't know if we were someplace else, it might have been, you know, a little bit more interesting. So wanted to tell you that those went well. It was a lot in a little bit of time. And so the presentation that she's going to give, we're going to put into the Dropbox, but we were kind of on the fly, literally on the fly, putting things together. But these questions mostly focus on the questions that we've heard coming out of the joint work sessions about Lynchburg City Schools and a couple other items. And with that, Madam Mayor, I'll turn it over to Ms. Witt.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And if I were that prophetic, I'd have won the lottery and I wouldn't be here, so just saying. So just kind of an update for where we are. Obviously, you know what we've been through, but just to kind of give you an update in the process, we've gone from a council retreat through a number of work sessions and regular meetings to kind of get where we are today. The summary we've given you, we've had questions from City Council, and we've answered those questions on CIP, utilities, and Lynchburg City Schools. The schools did respond to those in a memo. So we've had some other questions about funding requests, and just wanted to make it clear kind of where we are. The school board did request $43.7 million as the local funding. Currently, $39.4 million is what's in the 25 proposed budget, which is $4.3 million above proposed. Based on the presentation that was given at the joint meeting, the funding for the $3.4 million would help restore the ongoing, play on words there. The funding would help restore the Restore program, which is an ongoing cost. The $1.2 million relatively would be added to a grant that they've received to fund that program. And also one-time funding for a 1% staff bonus based on the governor's budget. So that's kind of what was presented at the joint meeting. So The March Calc tool was recently released, and if we look at that March Calc tool for estimates for the 25 school funding, there, for the state sales tax, there is an additional $393,000. For the SOQ programs, and this is based on how the state lays out these funding categories. So the SOQ programs, the schools would receive about $3.7 million less. In incentive programs, and that's primarily their at-risk funding, it's $7.6 million through those categories that fall into those incentive programs. And then their lottery-funded programs is about $415,000 more. So the net additional state funding is about $4.7 million based on whatever gets adopted for our city schools.
Maybe Don and I will go to Las Vegas together. I think I gave that number about $4 million extra in the state.
Yeah.
I also said with regarding I'm glad you used the calc tool, because in the budget, I think the schools gave us a number that said there's an increasing ADM. In fact, it's a declining.
I'm getting there.
Next slide.
Good.
I'm getting there. So, schools funding with ADM. So the schools submitted a proposed budget based on a projected enrollment of 7,376. The state ADM projects 7,161.35, of a difference of 214.65 less. So the thing you have to pay attention to here is when the schools submitted their proposed budget, they used the state ADM projection for the state revenues. So if you look at where they think they're going to be with enrollment compared to what was submitted to us, it would be about $1.6 million in additional funding for the state. So when they play out their numbers, they get their state budget based on the ADM from the state. And then there's a true-up point in the spring of which they either get more or less funding from the state. And so if they really end up with 7,376 children, then the state would provide about another $1.6 million. So that kind of reconciles those two numbers.
And those numbers are based on like about 7,500 per ADM where the state pays for Lynchburg City Schools.
Correct. So we also had a question about real estate tax rate being increased to $1. And just to remind you, each penny on the real estate tax rate equals $773,187. So should council increase the real estate tax rate to $1, we would realize about $8.5 million in additional revenue. And it was asked, what would that do for us? So that would fund the $4.3 million to fund the school board request, and also could be used, $4.2 million of it, to fund additional CIP projects.
I guess just a quick question, if I can jump.
No, can you please let her finish?
Yeah.
Or let me
It's right
call
on this
you.
one. This one you can't do.
We're going to let her finish her presentation.
Well, you can't raise the real estate tax rate from 89 cents to $1, just carte blanche. You have to actually have a public hearing. It's a requirement that you have to have advertising and notice and all of those things, which I don't believe we have the time.
This is just
Can we just let her do her presentation?
Good.
not proposing,
Gotcha.
just
I get it.
answering
I
the
get it.
question.
We're answering questions. This
Okay.
is not us proposing a real estate tax increase.
But normally
This is
somebody
responding
would
to
say that
questions.
would be illegal. Like, for example, when we set the rate at 89 cents, I remember hearing somebody say, that's illegal, you can't do that. I would assume somebody would say, you can't just raise the rate.
There would have to be a public hearing and a number of
Yeah,
steps.
good deal. Thank
But
you.
this was
All
just
right,
to
Ms.
answer
Witt, we're going to
the
let you
question.
finish your presentation before people ask any more questions or call out things. Thank you. Go ahead.
Okay,
Thank you.
almost, one last slide. So we did have other questions, one from City Council that I believe we addressed, that Lynchburg City Schools elementary School security projects would be an additional $3 million that we were looking for how we could fund those should council choose to do that. And also there was a question regarding the Downtown Lynchburg Association request of $50,000 for Bright Nights. So those were other questions that we have been asked. And that's it.
And so to that point, those capital projects, we have, if you remember or recall, when we talked about the security piece, we pushed another project, the airport, out a year to be able to do it. And then we have done similar, and I'm not exactly sure on the 50 that are associated with Bright Nights.
The Bright Nights, we would look at other downtown projects to find cash funding to be able to provide those lights.
Primary projects.
Yes.
Questions from council, comments? Councilman Shins?
Copy of that, because I don't see that in the,
Yeah, that's what I was explaining. We were traveling last week, literally on the fly, kind of getting questions from you. Put this together just absolutely. We'll upload it right after this in between the two meetings.
Dr. Wilder?
Can I see the slide about the additional money coming in? Just so I
For
can-
schools?
Yes. So is that 4.7 million? So is the school considering that in their numbers yet, or are they still fluid numbers?
This is based on what the state provided as the March calc tool, of which they update their original governor's budget numbers.
So this is essentially based on the budget, whether you call it the crossover budget or the General Assembly's budget, that was approved last month and a half ago. There's still a lot of negotiation left, right? So the governor proposed a budget. He's got a competing budget. They're going to have to negotiate to figure out where we actually land. So there's still some time left here until we get a final answer. But point being, there's a lot unsettled at the state, right? And the level of funding that's going to come from the state still very much up in the air. And based on how or what or which items in the school's request that council might choose to fund, it's possible that some of the state funding could be used to meet those objectives. So it's good information. It's not settled, but we are following this really closely. As soon as we have some resolution, we'll be able to get that information to council.
When do we think the state budget will be finalized? I know it's going back and forth. What's that deadline period? Is that deadline for that?
22nd of April is when they're supposed to conclude, but their expectations at this point is probably going to go beyond that. So hopefully as soon as possible. But again, we're not as prophetic as Donna. We can't forecast state budget actions as well as we can forecast earthquakes. So I wouldn't want to guess at this point.
This is just at one point in time based on the state's March calc tool.
Okay. Thank you, appreciate it.
Councilman Helgeson?
And the good thing is, at least this is correct. You know, I think schools had given us numbers, and then when asked about it, some of the emails came back and they used the enrollment numbers as opposed to ADM. And, you know, it's one thing for somebody in the planning staff to not know the difference between ADM and enrollment, but, you know, the director of schools needs to know that those are vastly different numbers. Those are vastly different things because they're specific to the funding formulas that come from the state. And so with that at least is open and transparent, that says, yes, if you can go down one more slide, Donna, that there is not an increase as presented to our city staff wrongly, but the actual based on the calc tools, which the projection is 7161, which is 200 less. With that, also Cooper Weldon has now looked and said, here's what the next 5 years are. It's an additional of 500 less children. So are we only staying on these slides? I do have another question on a different topic. We can come back to it.
The idea here was to date specific, kind of respond to the questions that you've posed that we have not answered. And these have been the wealth of them between the last meeting and here.
So with that, well, I guess that may
Well, I
not
have
be
a question
done.
about one of those slides before we move on, if that's possible.
Well, I don't want to give up the, I know what happens when I give up the ability to speak. So I don't want to relent that.
Well, if
Fair
I'll
point.
go back
So,
to you if I can
anyway,
comment on the
I've
slide.
tried that before. So on page, last time somebody asked a question, I think Vice Mayor Faraldi asked the question with regarding the roundabout on Nationwide Drive. This probably isn't Donna. Somebody had thrown out the fact that maybe we could put in a light for 300,000 or some number. Have we got any numbers on that yet?
No firm numbers, but we'll
No firm numbers, because the reason I'm asking this is we have another project that is in our CIP number, page 65, which is currently allocated about 11 million. It's the roundabout on Ward's Ferry and CVCC. That one, there's already money allocated, about 11.3 million. The money is already there. It's 100%, well, it's not 100% local.
That's 100% state funded and managed.
It's
by
100%
VDOT.
state funded.
I'd like to call a point of order.
So
Madam Mayor, as you know, under our rules of procedure, before we begin a new topic, the old topic needs to be concluded before other matters that are not germane to the topic being addressed are concluded. I would submit, Madam Mayor, if Councilman Helgeson's comments are specific to the presentation that's currently on the table, the discussion could continue, but if not, I think Madam Mayor could ask other council members if they'd still like to speak or offer questions or comment on the presentation that's in front of it. And if not, certainly council could go on to a new subject.
just for clarification, it is the fiscal year 2025 proposed budget reconciliation, so, which is very germane. I'm not talking about something different. And we've already asked those questions with regarding previously about the roundabout. So my question would be, and two, this is going to take quite a bit of time. So some of the citizens back there that I've talked to, they've been waiting and waiting for improvement on Ward's Ferry Road. If we can put in a traffic light for a few $100,000, that's going to help improve the road and the flow of traffic and improve it quickly, as opposed to this one it sounds like it's not even going to start until 2026 and then finish, at some point. I imagine it's going to block it up at length of time. I'm wondering if we can find a little bit, and you had mentioned, which is, I recognize that's now the curveball, that it is 100% state funded.
100% state funded. Funding was approved through Smart Scale. VDOT's managing the project.
So that's totally different than, totally different. So we can't, yeah, okay, thank you. I'm glad I could at least ask that.
I have a question about the Bright Nights.
Yes.
So we want to pursue looking at where that funding can come from. Is that something we want to discuss tonight, or is that something we should discuss at our next reconciliation
I
meeting?
would ask that council allow staff to find it in current appropriations and not be looking into 25 projects, but find it within a downtown-related project in our current CIP.
So, is that something that we should just email you about?
To be helpful, kind of a head nod. What I thought I heard, and there's been a wealth of support and or interest, and it was also contemplated when we got into the agreement with DLA that we would do successive years of this investment. And so the sense we have on our end is that, and forgive me if I'm getting out over my skis, the sense that we have is that there's complete support to support this effort. And so we've just kind of working with our existing authorization to kind of make it happen here as opposed to in 25. So
right.
if I've missed it, please forgive me, but the sense I have is that you're all very supportive of this event.
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
I just didn't know if, so that was just something that y'all were just going to figure out where you could pull it from then out of the current.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. All right, great. Anyone else have a question about what's currently up on the slides or anything else in the budget? No? Councilman Mischins?
Just, and I think this came up last year with a lot of this nonprofit type funding, DLA, for example, if we can just go ahead and make sure that there are individual votes for each line item when it comes up, I'd appreciate that. And then specifically, if we're able to find funding for downtown Christmas lights, I would like to see if there were maybe other options to invest that either into literacy programs or workforce development programs to try to get people jobs or help people that are struggling with reading to learn how to read. I think that would be a much better way to spend that $50,000 if we were to find it. That's all.
As far as the DLA funding, there's not a contribution to DLA. The way this $50,000 would work is that city would own this section of lights. We would not just be transferring money to DLA. We would be procuring lights in efforts with DLA. But that comes through our procurement where we procure those lights so that, but we work with them to make sure that we're not picking lights they don't want.
Got it. So just to be clear, if we can find $50,000 to spend on lights that we're going to own and put out once a year, I'd rather see, I'd rather not even spend the money, but if we're going to spend the money, I'd rather do it in ways that we can help people that are struggling with reading or help people that need workforce development access. I think that's a much better way that's going to benefit our citizens better than Christmas lights.
And I was just addressing that you wanted the DLA vote separately.
Correct.
As if it were a nonprofit, but this wouldn't be considered nonprofit funding.
Well, the way that it was explained previously was that was seed funding for more contributions is kind of the way it was explained.
But how we work with them is that whatever the city purchases with this money is owned by the city, and it's procured through our procurement office and then maybe stored by DLA, but we work with them in like what kind of light to buy kind of thing, so it fits in their overall theme.
Got it.
But it's not giving them funds as a contribution.
It's an in-kind contribution, essentially.
It's a support of the Bright Nights
Correct.
event and the lighting event and what's going on with the Bluff Walk. And it's a balancing act, right? The reason this is on the slide is because council has shown support from a number of council members for the project. Best part about the Bright Nights event is it is an economic development driver, right? I think we saw from the numbers that Ashley presented after the event wrapped that it is driving revenue in the city, and that's the revenue that potentially we can use to put back into other programs, and it's ongoing revenue rather than one-time spending. So. I don't know if it's going to generate $50,000 a year in additional revenue for the city, but it is growing the economy, right? And it is economic development. So, and that's the primary difference, right? Is there has been questions about that funding through the budget work sessions this year. Council's been generally supportive, so that's why it's on the list.
Councilman Dolan?
Yeah, I was just going to say, maybe if we cut the tax rate 20%, we might have some money to do some of these programs that we want for our children. So.
Councilman Hugginson?
I would, as big of a stretch as you could try to make it, there's no way on earth that I could think of that we could say the 50,000 is an economic development tool. People aren't coming from out of state to come see some Christmas lights shining and filling up the hotels. I mean, I'm sure it's a nice thing, but in order to have a cost benefit over the 50,000 would be pretty difficult. I mean, people will come for, people like Christmas lights in every community, across the country. So to have that being a really economic driver, I think that's a stretch. I think it's a good stretch that you tried off the cuff, but off the cuff, I would say it isn't. So, I mean, it just, you can't let something go, sorry, that's,
The one thing we did see, that the data documented,
a lot of people came, I get it.
a lot of people came.
People came and bought hot chocolate, but instead of having lights over at one other side of town, they came to this part of town, which doesn't have any economic benefit for the city of Lynchburg in 50 square miles, so.
What we did see is increased spending at our restaurants, right?
Downtown.
Downtown restaurants.
Yes.
But those downtown restaurants generate meals tax revenue that can be used across the city.
Yeah, so if somebody eats in the downtown restaurant on Friday night, they're not eating at a Wards Road restaurant or Timberlake Road restaurant on that same Friday night.
And I think
So
we're
that's the-
seeing general
Yeah.
growth in our meals tax that is far outpacing. And you know, this is,
Yep, I know.
but it did certainly generate some data that's pretty compelling.
Yep. Good.
Council, Dr. Wilder?
Again, I just want to reiterate, I appreciated the information. Again, we must continue to remember there's a good quality of life in our community, and those are seeds of in a quality of life. To continue to have services for our community, that's why you live in a city or community, so you can have attractions like that. Again, the investments that's made into the businesses that are coming downtown, the investments that people see, well, I do like the Lynchburg, I do like things that's happening here in the riverfront or other areas. So I think all that works together, with the Christmas lights and the streetscape. You know, I was looking at the landscape on 220 on the expressway and at the city stadium to see the flowers. You may say those flowers have no purpose, but again, it just adds to that quality of life. There's not a dead city. There's something that's happening in that community. So I think all those things work together, that we as a community need to continue to work to make sure our city is the best city, that people want to move here. So this is another tool in our toolkit that we have to add flavor to our beautiful city. The persons like going to Liberty will say, I want to stay in this community because there are attractions are happening and things are happening in this community. Thank you.
Vice Mayor Frialdi?
I do think that the notion that downtown, the Christmas season special time of year, if someone has to at least offer a different perspective insofar as how far people will travel to witness this kind of a thing. I know folks who will drive over an hour to go to, is it the Elks Lodge in Bedford? I know people who will drive 2+ hours to go to Roanoke for their, what is it called again? I don't quite remember.
Explore Park?
They have a fancy Christmas name for it, but I mean, so all to say, it's a one-time investment to allow for a year in and year out attraction. And while some on this dais may not frequent downtown as much as others, you cannot deny that downtown Lynchburg is the cultural, central, economic hub for this region. And if you were there, you saw thousands of people coming to downtown Lynchburg, posting about Lynchburg on social media, bringing web traffic, foot traffic, economic traffic to this city. Granted, yeah, they may not have gone to a Wards Road or a Windhurst location, I grant that. And yet, the impact is still profound. To say carte blanche or just to say, you know, it wouldn't bring people in, I do want to humbly submit, the data says to the contrary. You know, if there's a desire to bring a similar service, similar opportunity for Wards Road or Windhurst, I think I've said in passing, you know, Windhurst has an opportunity to be, I think, a second downtown for the city if it had the retail base, but unfortunately or unfortunately, it's a lot of one type of sector, so I don't know how much that'll change. Needless to say, I think that we need to pump the brakes on throwing out there that, you know, this wouldn't bring folks from a good bit away. This does, and we saw the data This is a continuation with that. $50,000 is very minimal in our grand scheme of the budget, and I think it's something that the return on investment is certainly worthwhile. I don't support everything we're doing downtown, but this is one that I certainly do.
Thank you. And I think, as we did see people coming from far and wide, and like the Vice Mayor said, our data absolutely supports the investment, paying it off. You know what? And we have ward representatives that can absolutely advocate for some great things to be done in their wards that can bring revenue to their people. And I would love to hear people do that. Like he said, in Windhurst or in Ward 1 or Ward 3. Ward 2 is, Dr. Wilder, I know he's thrilled about all the investments that are made in his ward. But, I mean, if there are any great ideas that other ward representatives want to bring forward to bring revenue, I'd love to hear it. And I'm glad we heard about literacy, because I'll be talking all about that in my roll call comments and all the work I've been doing with one of our local nonprofits. For months now, we've been talking about some ideas we have that we're working on, some private funds to get for them, and all the work I've been doing with schools and some other organizations. So I'm glad that was brought up. I'll be talking about that in depth here in a couple minutes. Yes, Vice Mayor.
One quick bit, as I remembered the presentation, the #1 zip code to frequent downtown during this time period for the Christmas lights downtown was 24502.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Witt. Yes?
Based on a comment that was made up here a moment ago, where's the majority of our tax revenue come from in the city? Is it downtown or is it outside of downtown?
Probably more Wards Road than downtown, because
Right.
there's more restaurants.
Because I just want to be
more
clear that there was a
retail.
statement made that the economic engine for the city is downtown.
Madam Mayor,
And the,
statement is
I have the
incorrect.
floor, Vice
I know
Mayor.
you do. I'm just saying it's an.
The statement was made that
misrepresenting what I'm
downtown is
saying.
the
That's all.
economic engine for the city of Lynchburg.
No, it's not what
And
I
I
said.
just want to be clear that the majority of our tax revenue does come from the wards road.
Marty, I'm not besmirching your statement. I said that downtown Lynchburg is the cultural economic hub for the Lynchburg region, not the city, for the region. So it's okay. I don't disagree with you. I don't disagree with Ms. Witt, but it's important that we're clear with what was said.
Councilman Taylor.
It's one city, one people. We all pay our taxes, and we all live here.
Agreed. Thank you. Okay, moving on to roll call. Dr. Wilder.
Okay, well, I didn't think it was coming so fast. Okay. No items, I'm so sorry. I had something I wasn't ready for. He's getting ready.
Councilman Dolan.
I have nothing.
Councilman Helgeson.
No items.
Councilman Mischins.
No items.
Councilman Taylor.
Yes, I had the opportunity to visit an energy storage facility out in San Diego. Massive battery facility, and that's what we are doing here in Lynchburg. They say battery storage, which threw me off a little bit.
Right.
But it's an energy distribution center. And that's what we're putting here in Lynchburg. It was very interesting.
Thank you. Councilman Taylor. Vice Mayor Feraldi.
No items.
Okay. So this past week, I was invited to speak at our main library during the spring break and read to some of our kiddos. It ended up being, I guess, mainly like preschoolers and kindergartners, maybe some first graders, and it was really great. And I got to read Good Night Lynchburg by Richard Loving. And many of you know that I have been advocating literacy a lot over the last probably 4 or 5 months after I've realized that we really have a lot of struggling readers in our city, and I think it's not just our city, it's a statewide problem, it's a national problem. I came to find out that if you're not literate, if you're not an independent reader by the 3rd grade, that you have a 65% greater risk factor for being incarcerated, and that 70% of incarcerated males that are African American are illiterate. I've learned a lot of statistics that are very unsettling about people who have difficulty reading. We have a lot of students in our high schools and middle schools that struggle reading, and it has made me really want to get behind making sure that our students are confident readers so that they have every opportunity to have successful futures. So I have partnered with Legacy Education Center, and we are trying to find ways we can find former and retired reading teachers who know how to really teach reading phonetic reading, so teach children that really don't know how to read yet, or older kids, or even adults that don't know how to read yet, can learn to read and be confident readers and can be employed. And we can find volunteers that are willing to kind of come back into the field and help do that in our schools even, and help fill gaps there, because we don't have literacy teachers or resource reading teachers at the high school level who will come in and do that. And so Legacy Education Center has been wonderful and willing to help kind of put that together, and we're looking for some private funding to help work into and helping that work in the schools right now, and helping getting some of our kids reading. And so that's been a really cool partnership. So reading to those little kids this week was just a reminder of how important it is for us to read with our children, read to our children, and just enforcing the importance of literacy at a young age. But reading at any age is so important. So I really appreciate the library letting me get to do that this week. And our department that we're highlighting today is the Water Resources Department. So Lynchburg Water Resources is committed every day to providing Lynchburg residents, businesses, and visitors with essential services, including the uninterrupted supply of quality drinking water, reliable sewer service, and the management of our city's stormwater so our streams and rivers stay clear and healthy. Water Resources is responsible for operations of 2 water treatment plants, producing an average of 10.5 million gallons of drinking water each day, serving a population of over 100,000 people in Lynchburg and surrounding counties. Operations of Lynchburg Regional Water Resource Recovery Facility, treating over 12 million gallons of wastewater and removing and disposing of over 70 tons of solids per day, returning the treated water to the James River even cleaner than the river itself. Maintaining 455 miles of water lines, including numerous storage tanks and pump stations. Cleaning, inspecting, and maintaining over 445 miles of sewer lines and manholes. Maintaining and inspecting over 200 miles of stormwater pipes, 900 stormwater BMPs, and cleaning more than 6,900 stormwater inlets. The department has earned the Excellence in Waterworks Performance Awards from the Virginia Department of Health for 18 consecutive years for exceeding all water quality requirements. The Water Resource Recovery Facility routinely receives the National Association of Clean Water Agencies Gold Peak Performance Award for exceptional permit compliance. Water Resources utility line crews respond to water emergencies 24/7 to repair water main breaks and sewer overflows, even in below freezing temperatures. Water and wastewater operators are on the job 24/7 to keep our water flowing. A chemist, laboratory manager, and lab techs perform hundreds of thousands of water quality tests annually. CCTV crews inspect our sewer and stormwater pipes. The meters team handles water reading and replacements. An outreach team educates the community about environmental stewardship and sustainability through stream cleanups, student field trips, and more. The department's engineers, construction team, and others tackle our city's infrastructure challenges by planning, designing, and delivering major capital projects. Some of these include the Blackwater CSO Tunnel Project, College Lake Dam Removal, the Richland Hills Sewer Extension Project, and ongoing water line replacement projects in neighborhoods across Lynchburg. It's all part of Water Resources' vision: clean water, clear streams, and thriving community. Good job, Water Resources. Okay. Consideration of a closed meeting to discuss a proposed building improvement project under the authority of the Public-Private Education Facilities Infrastructure Act of 2002 pursuant to 2.2-3705611 and 2.2-3711A6 of the Code of Virginia, 1950 as amended. May I have a motion to go into a closed meeting? Do I have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion?
Nope.
Do we want to go ahead and just do a voice vote? Okay.
Yes.
Councilmember Hegelson?
Yes.
Councilmember Mischins?
Yes.
Councilmember Taylor?
Yes.
Councilmember Wilder?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Feraldi?
Yeah.
Mayor Reed?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Okay, we are enclosed.